Hi, everybody. We're thrilled to welcome you today back to the Places You'll Work. And today our special guest on the show is Zephan. And Zephan grew up in Australia, and he came to the US permanently when he went to college. And his journey in higher education began with a stint at De Anza Community College. And while there, he was at a career fair, and that led him to sign up for a stint in the Marines. And he did a 4.5-year tour. And he then smartly used the GI Bill to pay for his engineering degree, which he did at UC Berkeley and completed in 2019. Through a connection and on-campus recruiting, he landed a software engineering position at Adobe, which is where he's still working today. So we're going to hear about that. Welcome onto the show, Zephan.
Thanks for inviting me on.
We're so excited to hear about your story and a little bit more about you. And we always like to start off the podcast with a little lightning round just to get to know you a little bit more personally. So the first question is, what are you surprisingly good at?
Tap dancing. A little rusty now, but still.
What are you surprisingly bad at?
Quick math, like sort of quick calculations.
An insecurity of yours?
Being seen as, being pigeonholed as a certain type of person.
What's one thing on your bucket list that you hope to tick off your list?
Kind of like a basic thing, but I've always wanted to do like a tour around through Europe. Like my mom, when she was young, that was one of the things she did.
What's a bad habit of yours?
Is just, procrastination. Like I am notorious for leaving things to the last minute.
And the last lightning round question is, if you could have any job on earth, all of the options out there, what would you pick?
I mean, it's kind of like a 5-year-old's answer, but I think probably if I could have any job, even though I might not have the skills for it, is I would love to be like an astronaut still.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the coolest job in the world, and it's like only the brightest and best people get to do that, and I think doing that would be amazing.
I still like hearing those answers. It makes us learn a little bit more about you. Now going into like the deeper questions, just to understand you a little bit more, advice to any people that are listening and just hearing about your story. So just to get a better idea of who you are as a person, if you could just talk about a little bit your growing up, how was your environment, your family life, who made you who you are today?
Growing up was pretty hectic. So when I was young, we moved around pretty often. I remember up until 9th or 10th grade, I basically didn't spend more than 2 or 3 years at a given school. So my dad was kind of like an entrepreneur. So he would work with starting businesses and things like that. So that's kind of the first things that I can remember. So his first business was pretty successful, and we lived in a couple of different cities as he kind of moving. So when I was really young, we kind of lived in a tiny little apartment by the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. And then when I was like 5 or 6, we moved into like a bigger house a little bit down the road. Then we moved to a really big house in Sydney, Australia. And we're there for a few years. That's when I did like my 1st through 3rd grade. And then he wanted to try starting a new business. So we moved to the US. And that's where I spent a couple of years as a kid here in the States. And a bit of a culture shock for me coming from like Australia, moving to the States. There was definitely a lot of changes in just the way kind of people approach things, and with respect to like, how seriously they take studying and working and things like that. Mm-hmm. It was a very different culture as a kid. And then after that, I moved back to Australia, first down to Tasmania, which is where my mom was from, for like about half a year, and then up to Queensland, which is where I ended up going to high school. But kind of like for my formative years, like I can remember it was like a constant that we were always moving to new places. So it was always a lot of adapting to new locations and new kind of making new friends, meeting new people. Mm. And so that was, I think, a big formative influence on me. It was just like the constant of change, where it's like, if you meet someone, you're only going to know them for a couple of years, and then you're off to somewhere new with whole new people. So that was a big influence on me growing up.
I know you said your dad was an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Do you think that impacted how you see your job today, or just things like that you saw growing up that you think influence how you view things today too?
I think it probably does. I don't know if in a positive or negative way, because, I got to see like the sort of, well, at the time when I was that young, I didn't realize, but like the benefits of the success you can have with that, as well as the impact of like failure as an entrepreneur can have. Like I mentioned, the first venture that my dad started, he started before I think I was even born. But it was relatively successful. Him and his partner were able to put together a pretty successful business. And then I'm not sure if he sold the stake, but he stopped running that and he wanted to try and start a new business in the US. And that ended up not being as successful, or pretty much ended up like shuttering. So in the end, he ended up getting just a regular job in sales after that, which he was actually really happy in. He kind of, that's his element. But I think seeing that, I was like, okay, I can see like the stability that you might not have in that kind of thing. And that maybe influenced me to kind of want to look for something a little bit more secure.
I have a question about your first job. What did that look like? And if you could briefly explain how that first job may have impacted your current job, like if you had a specific opportunity, like an internship, you could talk about your first job, something that was an activity that was influential for you.
Sure. So I would say, the first job that I had, like that was something that paid me, was back when I was in high school. I mentioned I did musical theater and stuff. So I would actually do like over the school holidays, I would put on kind of shows in shopping centers that kids would come and watch. So I was in like, the big suits, like the baby bear suit or something for Goldilocks and the Three Bears to play, and doing performances like that. And like in the winter, I would do the caroling and walk around. So that was kind of my first thing I was paid for, though it wasn't really a steady job. But that was kind of interesting because it was a very obviously like public and out there sort of job. So you have to be willing to kind of put yourself out into an uncomfortable position, which is like stage work. So that was my first gig that I was paid for. My first steady job was probably actually the Marine Corps, which is a very different kind of environment.
How were you shaped by that? It's kind of a left turn for you to go to the military. Were you expecting to do that? And then once you did do that, kind of how do you think that changed you as a person?
Yeah, so it was definitely a bit of a left turn for me. I think nobody who kind of knew me really expected me to take that path. Before that, I had talked about like using the ROTC program in college. So I thought about doing that because one of my dad's best friends had done ROTC and gone into the Navy, and I knew him, and he retired as a captain, but I can remember as a kid like going on to his ship that he was the commander of and things like that. So I was like, yeah, being in the Navy is cool. But then and I'm sure we'll get to it, but when I moved to the US to go to university, I didn't end up getting accepted anywhere. So in that case, ROTC was off the table. And when I'd been going to a recruiting fair at community college, I was talked to some of the Marine Corps recruiters there, and they're like, yeah, you can use the GI Bill and you can take classes while you're in the military. When I actually signed up, pretty much everyone in my family was completely surprised. And it was a little bit of a change from what I was used to, but I had done, a bit of research, and I kind of knew what I was getting into. And like I said, like I'd known people who had been in the military, and I, thought that it was something that had a lot of benefits as far as what I could get out of it, structure-wise. Like I felt that, like I mentioned, I had time management issues, and I felt that I needed some discipline to help me kind of straighten that out. And it was something that I definitely I put thought into before I jumped in. Like I think I had about 6 months from when I first kind of signed up to when I actually shipped out.
Well, it turned out really well for you that you ended up then getting into UC Berkeley and also getting your schooling paid for. So in the end, it seems like it was, I don't know, it had a really positive outcome for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things where it's not the path that I intended to take, but I ended up getting where I needed to go. So
I bet that's the case so often for so many young people. Something I'm interested in is you got hired to your job at Adobe at a, on-campus recruiting. And I think young people might be interested to know, like, how did that actually come about? And what do you think you did right, in that interview, for instance, that enabled you to get a job that's probably pretty competitive to get?
I did find, I met with the Adobe recruiters, but actually the position I ended up getting hired for, I actually had gotten to know the manager for that position ahead of time because he lived kind of local to Berkeley, and his daughter actually went to the coding school that I taught at. And so when I was applying to Adobe, I said, hey, I'm applying. Would you put in a reference for me? Because we'd talked before and gotten along pretty well. And so he knew that I was studying computer science, and we chatted and had a pretty good rapport. So I mentioned to him that I was looking to apply to Adobe, and he actually looked up my resume in the pile and had it put in so that his team was looking at interviewing me. And so I interviewed with him and then with two of his people on adjacent teams to him. And that was kind of a big, I think, leg up, is just being able to have a contact who can help you
totally
get in. That was a huge help. But I think as far as interviewing, it was definitely stressful. And I know I felt like some of the things, I just felt like I bombed it. I walked out, I was like, oh my gosh, they're not even going to let me in. I totally bombed that interview. They were asking me questions about things I didn't know about. And I did my best effort to kind of answer clearly and, show my problem solving steps when I was given something that I didn't fully understand. I think that's an important thing that people look at, is because sometimes they'll ask questions that they know you might not know the answer to, and they just want to see how you'll react in that situation where you don't know the answer, but you need to figure something out. And I think that is a big portion of what they're looking at.
I had a quick question. I know in your story that you have went to community college. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to tap on that a little bit, because I feel like some of the people we've interviewed may have not gone that route. There's so many routes to go through, and we've learned a lot from the people we've interviewed. And I just kind of wanted to highlight that. So how do you think community college impacted you as a student? Did it help you for the better? Do you wish you went another route? What do you think helped you in that way by going to community college first before transferring?
Yeah, I think community college is actually a really good choice for me. There's many reasons. One, financial is obviously one big benefit, is you save a lot of money by doing your first 2 years in community college. Actually in the community college, the environment is a little bit different than going to a 4-year. So in the 4-year college, you can kind of fit into everyone else's pace because everyone is working towards getting their 4-year degree, and they're all really focused, and everybody is living nearby or in the dorms and, going to classes all the time. And that's kind of their main focus. Whereas when you're in community college, you get a mix of people who are maybe they're only doing it part-time while they're working full-time, or you have people who are, re-entering university after taking a break for a pretty long time, or have people who are only just doing an associate's degree, not doing a 4-year.
Let's talk a little bit about your job at Adobe, because it's such an interesting place to be able to work. What does a week of work kind of entail?
So I'll give you actually a 2 week. So we use something that's called Agile, which anyone who does kind of software development will be familiar with. Everyone sits down, you say, all right, what are the goals we want to get done in these 2 weeks? And how do they relate to our overall goals? And so we'll have an overall, you have maybe a 3-month goal of what you want to finish. You want to complete a certain feature on one of your products. And you'll say, okay, this is the overall goal we have. We're going to break it into chunks, into 2-week chunks of work.
And is the work itself, you're doing coding, writing code?
Yeah, that's pretty much the bulk of the work I'm doing. Sometimes you'll be writing maybe some documentation or, like sketching out the plan or the architecture. But a lot of it is just kind of brass tacks, writing out the code. I do both front end and back end. So sometimes it'll be doing, architecture for our APIs or just writing out API responses. Other times for the front end, it'll be kind of designing the look of a page and putting things together and sending the tables and things like that.
And what have you found most challenging about the job? What has really kind of pushed you?
So probably one of the more challenging aspects for me has been, I guess, just being able to clearly communicate what you need from others a lot of the time. So for me, like when I have like given my a task and a goal, if it's like a clear-cut task, then like that's something that's pretty easy for me to just jump into and start knocking it out and just doing the work. But what's more difficult is when you have to coordinate with other people. You're relying on things coming from them in the right format, and then they're relying on you providing things the way they need it, and making sure that like you communicate back and forth, how things are going to integrate together. And I think that's definitely one of the difficult things, especially if you're kind of someone who's inclined to stay in like your own lane and kind of you just focus on your own work. Being able to communicate, right? It's like, it's like working on a team project. It can always be tough to make sure that everybody is syncing well with everybody else. I think that's definitely one of the things.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for giving us insight into your daily life as a software engineer. I think there could be millions of answers, but I think yours is very interesting and would give some more background information for people who are interested in something that you're doing today. So kind of going into like work environment things and stuff like that, you're constantly learning as in any form. So if you could tell us about a time that something didn't go well, maybe you were learning something, it wasn't the best, something came up that caused some conflict. How did you resolve that situation and what did you learn from it?
One story that kind of sticks out in my head because it's like kind of burned in there is from back in my time when I was in the Marine Corps, and we were getting ready for an exercise. It was just a training exercise, but it was one of the first ones where I'd been put in charge of some of the items. So basically we have kind of 2 sets of hard drives for when we do training. One is just regular, like unclassified, you can use whenever, and the other one are the classified secret hard drives. And those ones you have to, like, they're in a locked case and you need to kind of keep hold of them all the time. And we needed those to, I was in the artillery, so we needed those to shoot our cannons in the island we were going to. And it had been my responsibility to make sure we had those. And we were going from a ship and transporting across and landing on this island in landing crafts. So kind of, it's a very like intricate operation. And it's not like once you're there, there's not really an opportunity to go back and grab something. So since it's about something's going wrong, you can probably guess that when I arrived on the island and I opened up the back of our truck to look at all our gear. And I looked and I went, the secret hard drive's on here. And, in my head, I feel like I remember telling one of my junior guys to grab it and make sure we put it in the truck. But ultimately it was my responsibility to get those in there, and they weren't there. And there's basically no way for me to get back to the ship because that's not something that they let you do. And I have no way of communicating because we're on an island in the middle of nowhere. I don't have cell signal. I mean, people can't answer their phones on the ship. And there's almost no way for me to communicate and go, what am I going to do? We're going to be here for the next 3 days. And if we don't have these hard drives, we can't do any of our training that we need to do. We're not going to be allowed to. And I basically had to run back like down this long line of trucks to where the landing guys were, like where these giant hovercrafts were kind of landing in and rolling off all these trucks and, guns and things. And there's these Navy guys who stand there and they're the ones who organize everything. And I just talked to them. I'm like, look, I need you guys to help me. I need to communicate back to the ship that we need somebody to grab these like hard drives and bring them on like here on land. Otherwise, we're not gonna be able to do anything. And he didn't know me. He didn't know anything about what I did, but he was like, look, I'm going to see what I can do. I'm going to call people. And I basically stood there for like 2 hours talking to this guy who had a radio connected to the ship. And he was calling to someone in the ship's command center who was then hearing that. And he was trying to talk to anyone because there's maybe 5,000 people on the ship. It's a transport ship. Finding one guy who's able to go into this like secret area and grab these hard drives is very difficult. And I couldn't talk directly to anyone. It had to go through this chain of people to get there. And for the next 3 hours, I was basically just sitting there terrified what's going to happen, thinking like, I'm going to get demoted because of this. Like, I'm going to be I'm totally screwed. And on, I think the second to last transport that came in, the hovercraft came in and a bunch of infantry guides came running out. And I saw one of them break off and run towards the guy, to us. I was standing with the disembarking guys on their Humvee, and I'd been sitting there just sweating bullets. I see this guy, this officer run up, this captain, and he has a kind of confused look on his face, and he stops up and he's like, hi, I was getting onto the hovercraft and the LCAC, and somebody gave me this and said, I need to give it to the embark guys. I'm not sure what it is. And he has this locked Pelican case that's all of our hard drives. And I say, you're my angel right now. Thank you. So it seemed kind of like a hopeless situation, but I just kept pushing and kept, talking, didn't give up for like those 2 hours, just waiting, watching as all these, people came landing and getting onto the island. Nothing happened. And then finally, just the very last minute, my butt got saved and it paid off in the end.
That's such a good story.
Yeah,
it ended up working out.
Yeah, definitely.
That's an amazing story. That's probably something you'll probably never hear, but that is so great that you shared that with us. And I just thought that was a great story. As our traditional question towards the end of our podcast, we love to end out with this question. It's kind of just a fun tidbit just to end out with. And yeah, so we would love to hear about if you could choose one superpower out of all of the options for your day-to-day work life, what would you choose and why?
If I could choose one option, I mean, it's got to be time stop, right? I mean, like keeping track of time is my worst enemy. So being able to just like freeze time for a minute and then, okay, I just need 5 more minutes to finish this thing that I was working on, and then
pause.
It's got to be that. I can't think anything else that would be more helpful for me in everything.
I wish we had that too.
Right? Doesn't everybody?
Oh, thank you so much for talking with us today and giving us your time. We learned so much about so many different things and jobs and stories from you. So we just wanted to say thank you for coming on here and talking with us today.
Yeah, you're a great interview. That was really
Thank you. It was really fun. I appreciate you for having me on.